We apologize at the moment for in the interpreting booth we do not have any sound.
À ses côtés, Denis Gravouille.
Standing over, you're the Federal Secretary in charge of Social Protection, Mr. Employment of CGT Trade Union, to keep it simple. Alain Gumillac, Director of Manpower Group of France. For Southern Europe, Manpower is a group we know well. It's a temporary work group, and right next to me we have Olivier Nella, President of Fournis Mazars France. This is a management consultancy firm. Thank you for being here, and please take your seats. We'd like to say hi to everybody who is listening to us and watching us remotely. It's quite a huge theme, full employment. It's an objective in itself. But perhaps we should have a little definition, first of all, to determine what full employment is. What does this mean in France and elsewhere? And to do that, Stéphane Cassillo is going to give us an idea of the situation. And yes, of course, a quick definition and some feedback to tell you where we are at the moment. So full employment, there's no real very clear definition that is accepted by everybody. But we believe that between 3 and 5% unemployment rate is considered to be full employment. In France, we're at 7.4%, so we're not really yet at the level of full employment. Most of the other European countries are at 5% or a little bit below. The OECD employment rate is 4.9% on average. So there's not really unemployment. There is full employment almost everywhere except in a few European countries, those southern European countries, where full employment isn't yet a reality. Countries like Italy, although it's getting close in Italy, Greece and Spain. In Spain, the unemployment rate remains quite high, and to a lesser extent, France. So to get to 5% unemployment rate, we need to have 1 million additional jobs in concrete terms in France. But some people believe that full employment is more a question of the rate of occupation. In other words, you reach a certain proportion of people in the working population are in employment. In France, this rate is 2/3. In Germany, it's 77%. That in France, that would represent an effort of 4,000 extra jobs. So 4 million extra jobs, rather. So there's a big difference between those two figures. Since COVID, France has created 2.4 million jobs. So it is achievable. It can be done. Do we need full employment? Yes, we do need full employment for financial reasons and also for the future. If we create 4 million jobs, we will bring in 100 billion euros of revenue into the public coffers. So you can imagine the difference that would make for health, for the seniors, for investment in adaptation to climate change, all kinds of things. Education, of course, very important as well, and research and development questions that it will be very important for the future, where there is a great need for investment. So full employment is, of course, has to do with social cohesion and inclusion, and also it's very much connected with the future. It's very important to be able to finance our future investments. As I said, the situation overall has improved in France. At 7.5% of unemployment, you might think we're at the right at the floor in France, whereas in other countries it's 3.5%, so they're doing much better. A few years ago, we were at 9 or 10% unemployment in France. So we have made some progress. We're getting closer to this level of full employment. thanks to a number of reforms that were carried out over the last 15 years. Regardless of the governments, a series of reforms have been put in place. First of all, reducing the cost of labor for low wages. Previously, 90 the labor cost for low wages was very high. This is a coherent strategy for many years. Other reforms that have reinforced the incentives to keep your job or to return to work. I'm thinking of the reforms of retirement pensions and of unemployment allowances. Over the last 15 years, these reforms have really been the main factor in increasing the level of employment of seniors. So this tends to increase the age of retirement. And in addition, you have to have. It's important to say that you need to have additional strategies to keep this full employment rate. So let's look at some questions. What should be the most important subject to go further and to get to this level of full employment, either in terms of rate of employment or unemployment rate? I think that now we need to turn towards what we call the non-pecuniary barriers to employment. Why is it that some people look for a job and don't find a job? Is it a problem of providing the right kind of support for job seekers? Maybe France Travail, the employment office previously called France Emploi, maybe they need to change their strategy. There's also a question of mobility of people. There's also a question of integration and inclusion of people who are very far removed from the labour market. There's also the question of the quality of the jobs that people find, because this is important for a number of people. It's very difficult to stay in their job because of the quality of the job and the working conditions. Here I'm thinking of the importance of training to be able to change your career. What more can we do in terms of training? A lot of reforms have been in place over the last few years where we transformed education and training quite successfully. What else can we do? I'm thinking, of course, of education. We have too many young people leaving the education system without any diplomas or qualification, about 100,000 per year. What else can we do? What can we do, bearing in mind that people don't have the right skills, and in that case it's very difficult to find the right job, and it's difficult for employers to find the employees, so it hinders the creation of jobs. What can we do in terms of investment in SMEs and very small enterprises? We have a deficit of employment in these and very small and medium-sized enterprises. One of the central components of employment is the salary, and salary depends on productivity. You can't have a high wage when you have companies that are not producing a very high level of productivity. What can we do also to promote the growth of startups, recent companies? Virtually half of the net growth in employment every year is produced by young companies, recent companies. So we need to create the right conditions for them to be able to grow quickly. That can boost the creation of jobs and get us closer to full employment. So those are the possibilities we could discuss. Since we only have a limited amount of time, I don't think we'll be able to answer all of those questions, but nevertheless we will try. Who would like to start? Alain Roumiac, perhaps, from Manpower. What do you think? Are we making progress in getting closer to full employment? What are your observations? In fact, you are the intermediary between the employers who, we haven't said this, but obviously they complain they are unable to find employees. They talk about a shortage of manpower, and there's also, you have employees who can't, or job seekers who can't find the job they're looking for. What are your observations? Hello, everybody. First of all, concerning my specific territory, I have countries which are in more than full employment. 2% unemployment rate in the Czech Republic, 2% in Switzerland. So you're saying it's possible? Yes. There are countries that do it, yes. Another subject you haven't mentioned is that also often these countries have a very strong industrial base. To be able to achieve full employment, industry and re-industrialization is a very important subject. You initially mentioned 2 points. Historically, since the last 65 years, our profession, above all, has been aiming to help people who find it difficult to integrate into the labour market. Our aim is to help them do that through temporary work and temping, to be able to acquire skills, to be able to get training, and then to be able to get a full-time, long-time job, to be able to get them onto the system of training and education. Of course, the issue of skills is very important, and you have to make this a good match between what companies need and what the employees have to offer. So every year we train more than 40,000 people in France, so that either they have their 2 days that they need to get a qualification to be able to work, or we also help them with alternation between studying and working, sandwich courses. They've also mentioned a number of barriers that need to be removed for some number of people. My personal conviction is that the most important subject to be able to achieve full employment, or at least to be able to have a good match between the demands of the businesses and to be able for them to be able to fill their vacancies, and for them to be able to reduce the unemployment rate and to find job seekers who will fill these positions. The most important thing is to work more on support, on accompanying people into the labour market. The problem is that in this country we have put the emphasis, I feel like there's been an arbitration. We put more money in compensation rather than into support. This is different from countries in Northern Europe. I'm not saying necessarily we'd have less compensation, less unemployment benefit, but I think we need to put more money into support for people to help them into a job. We are working with France Travail, the unemployment office in France, and they're helping us to provide this better support, including people who have been unemployed for many, many years. But in concrete terms, what are the barriers? The worst barriers to preventing full employment? Is it a problem of training? It is training, but not only that. If I'm looking at the work we do with France Travail, people say, I can't work because I have health problems. If you look at France Travail and Pôle Emploi, those people won't be able to help them with that. So if you combine expertise on the labour market with support from medical professions, then you will be able to help the person define in what kind of environment they will be able to find a job. And our experience shows us that over a period of 6 or 8 months, we're able to get 50% of those people into a job. So this demonstrates that if you don't support people and they help them, they will not have the means to be able to find a job in the labour market. So this subject of support is absolutely vital. I'm personally convinced of this. We have 300,000 people find a job every year. We accompany 500,000 through these different programs to get to this level of full employment. Of course, you have to have a flourishing economy. If the economy isn't generating any jobs, you can't reduce unemployment. But the most important point is to provide better support for job seekers, so that they have more confidence and so they can find a path to employment. So we have the Gavry, the Secretary General in charge of social protection at the CGT trade union. Do you agree with this? That it's important to give better support to job seekers? I'd like to react to 3 points. First of all, I don't agree with the definition of full employment as it has been described, because that's the first point. The second point is that we need to look at the reforms, which I think are pretty disastrous in terms of the retirement pensions and unemployment benefit. And then thirdly, we need to look at how we can find a policy to increase employment in France in general. First of all, we can't say that full employment is 5% if you don't look in addition at the quality of the employment. If you look at the France Travail statistics, we have 6,200,000 people who are registered, and we need to look at the people who at a particular time are not employed at any particular time, whereas in reality, job seekers spend their time working and working in short-term missions from one to the other successively. If you look at what happened during COVID in March 2020, when everybody had to stop working, or virtually everybody, most of the employees with long-term contracts had a partial, were working part-time. Others with short-term contracts didn't have a contract, and other people who were unemployed at the time meant that you have an unemployment rate of more than 5 million people. So you look at the unemployment rate as defined by the International Labour Office, which was defined in the 1960s, when you are either in a long-term contract or looking for employment. This is an inaccurate description. You're forgetting several million temporary workers. So apart from the controversy about how you define this, these are individual situations. I think we agree, everybody, that in France, even though the unemployment rate has gone down, we still have a lot of people who would like to work and who are unable to find a job. So what can we do? Let me just finish what I was saying about that point. I don't think that we can say that we have millions of people who remain in a precarious situation. On average, for a young person, for them to find their first long-term contract takes 9 years. That's the social situation we're in at the moment. We have millions of people in that situation. So full employment for us will never be just the employment rate. Where I agree with Stefan Castillo is that we have to look at the reality of employment for people who are at a working age. The indicators from the ILO are completely inaccurate. So the ILO says that if you work for 1 hour, you're no longer unemployed, according to their definition, which is inaccurate. Then, of course, there have been these reforms. I don't agree with the pension reforms that were put in place, and that means some people have been able to push back their retirement and have been able to continue working in the job they have. But the truth is, half of people aged 60 don't have a job. 28% of people aged 60 don't have a job. I have other figures which tell me it's more like 50% of people who are aged 60 don't have a job. Depends whether you're looking at the working population or people who are 60 years old. The question is, how do we avoid having these poverty traps with the combination of the reforms of unemployment benefit and retirement pension? It's hundreds of people who are not in a job and don't have an employment benefit and are a long way from being able to get the retirement pension. We haven't created jobs by changing the retirement pension age. We have reduced the expenditure linked to retirement, whereas in our opinion that should be increased. We haven't created jobs with the pension reform or with the reform of the employment benefit. So how can we do this? Well, our proposal is that we don't want to have a delocalization of industry. So you agree with Alain Vromiak that we don't want to have deindustrialization? Yes, absolutely. We know we have a major challenge, which is the environmental transition, and so we have to organize ourselves to make sure that we have reindustrialization, which is based on this ecological transition. We can't accept that all of the foundries that we're making parts for diesel cars have to close down. No, they have to be converted into factories that will make parts for electric vehicles. At the same time, France is opening up new sectors for electric vehicles. Yes, that's true. But, for example, in Aveyron, in Brittany and Poitou, a lot of factories have been closed and these territories have been deserted because of land use planning decisions. So the first point is reindustrialization, yes. So, for example, if you want some precise examples, in Gardanne, we have the coal plants have closed down. That's a good idea. We need to close down the coal-powered power plants. And for several years now, we've been fighting to have a transition to convert these factories. When you say support, you meaning supporting reconversions? So that when you close a factory that is based on coal, you have to change from a policy where you stop closing factories, saying the only solution is to go to a low-cost country where you can pollute because the environmental standards are lower. You have to transform and convert these factories and support the employees who can change their jobs. That's why we want to have a flexible unemployment support, so that when people are unemployed, they're not in a precarious situation. because at the moment 2/3 of people unemployed don't have any support of this kind. What we want to have is have a flexible system that makes it possible to support people so that although they're unemployed, they still have an employment contract. So we have a major challenge, which is to match the level of qualification, whether it's the original level of qualification or whether it's been acquired through vocational training. So it's a long-term investment. However, I don't believe that we should lower the level of compensation. The level of compensation is already quite low because we know that people get training when they're in a secure position. People aren't going to go and get training when they just need to survive. They can't afford to do that. However, when they know they have some security, although they're unemployed, then they will go for some training. Thank you very much. I'll turn now to Regan Laflud. Regan Laflud, the Director General of Malt in France. So this is a different kind of job. We're talking about salary jobs, but you are supporting and developing another type of work. Yes, I'll just tell you about the world of intellectual service provision. This is what we work on at Melt, and this is what we're promoting through freelancing. There are two things I'd really like to react to. The first thing is very important in a broader sense, talking about our relationship with work. We have to realize that the expectations that employees have about their work is completely different from the average employee had in the 1970s or 1980s. It has changed in several respects. First of all, people now work because they are able to, they are happy in their work and they want to find a good balance between their private life and their professional life. Since COVID, this trend has accelerated. So this search for value of their work is much greater than what you might have seen 30 or 40 years ago. And it's very important from a completely political point of view. And in the positioning of companies in relation to their employees, they have to take account of this. Yes, so you're saying they need to take that into account more? Yes, absolutely. So through our freelancing platform, we respond to that need almost by construction, because freelancing is a choice where people are independent. They're able to choose their employee or the person who's going to benefit from their service. They're going to choose their... Is it always a choice? In the world of intellectual service provision, it is, yes. When you talk to independent workers, we have 600,000 on a platform, and most of them say that they don't want to go back to being an employee. In the world of intellectual services, it's not the same for all kinds of temporary, not the same for temporary work, for temping. So for companies and for, in the broader sense, also for the political world, we have to understand that today we have a legal framework that is rather obsolete, where people work 5 days a week, where people in some cases have to work at a particular time of day, which often doesn't correspond to their needs. So if we look again at the world of employment, why is it that people are able to find jobs? You have to look at their original motivation and their aspirations, and you have to have a multifaceted approach to the world of work. The second point is the world of seniors. This is fundamental. You may have seen that the age pyramid, that increasingly we're going to need to get these seniors to be able to work. And mathematically, it costs more money to employ a senior than to employ a young person. We are convinced that the public policies have not yet provided enough support and promotion for the employment of seniors. The world of independent workers is a lever, because we can have a softer conversion or transformation. Somebody who is already at a retirement age can continue working. And this is fundamental in the transfer of skills. You have people who are 20 or 30 years of experience and want to transfer their skills and expertise to somebody else. The present framework doesn't make that possible. So the present scope of flexibilization, what you're saying is it's a very important cultural change that is happening in the world of work. The way people look at the world of work, whether it's chosen or it's forced on people, people no longer want to work as people worked before. And you're saying that the legal framework today, the judicial framework and the framework defined by public policies is no longer appropriate, is no longer fit for purpose and needs to be adapted. Yes, absolutely. And a final figure, the unemployment rate, as Stefan said, has been going down over the last 10 years. Over the last 10 years, the number of employees has also gone down from 92% to 85%. So we have to look at that change. Sometimes this is seen from afar and it's difficult to interpret. And this is because people are looking to be more and more independent and want to have a better balance between their private life and working life. Concerning this cultural aspect, let me, Ines Siddiqui, we have been talking about seniors. You work with the other end of the spectrum in terms of employment, which is young people. You tend to work with young people more. What do you observe? What are the difficulties? Bearing in mind that you're working in an area, I'll hand over to the microphone. You're working in a territory which is Saint-Saint-Denis in the suburbs of Paris. Yes, hello, yes, absolutely. I run a association called Get Up over the last 7 years, which works in Saint-Saint-Denis in the Paris suburbs. We have two areas of work. First of all, to support young people to help them find their place in society through training and education, and also to help them to take their full place as a citizen. These people aren't just statistics, they're also people who have a lot to contribute to society. And through the work of training the narrative about these urban areas and these young people by producing content, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So we support young people from the middle school to high school, and when we provide them with support during schools, and then we provide them with the training courses and internships, and throughout this stage of life until they're able to find a job. And then after that also, because then other issues with career progress in the companies for them to understand the codes. What are the aspirations of young people? First of all, to answer your question, how do we achieve full employment? Because this resonates very much with the issues of young people today. For me, the best way to achieve full employment is to give back greater value to work and people who work. For example, if you want to have full employment, there are jobs where there are not enough there's not enough workforce, that people are not enough people able to do these jobs. In these jobs include nurses, personal services, to also construction, teaching also. Why is that? Whereas during the COVID period, we giving them rounds of applause all the time. These jobs are because these jobs are very precarious and difficult. The working hours are very fractioned, and so this is why when I'm talking about recognition of work and of workers, we have to give them greater value. Apart from remuneration, there's also that comes up with that. And the second thing that's very important, we're looking at the top 10 of underemployment, because full employment also takes account of underemployment, people who are not working full-time, people who only work in the morning and then work in the evening again, who have a working day that is split up, and people can't be with their children when they want to be. When you're working as a freelance in an intellectual profession, that's one thing. Normally you have security, you have a flat, you have some housing. When you're freelancing in a delivery business, you can't build anything. It's impossible to build up your life. That's the reason why we have a lot of people from the working class districts, and they tend to work in this kind of job. Just give you a figure, 1 worker out of 5 today lives in a working class district. 1 person who 1 out of every 4 people who work in delivery services live in a working class district. So they are much more represented in these professions than they should be. We've been working for 2 years on the question of commitment of young people in these areas and their prospects in France. Recently, we launched an Ipsos survey to give some figures. I'd like to share these with you now. The main concern of young people in these districts is precarity. It's work. The second is the future of the social system and the future of the health system, because they've seen their parents working in construction and service industries. They've seen that their parents didn't have access to a good retirement pension. A lot of people also do these difficult jobs, and so they're not able to work until retirement age because they're in poor health. That's another problem. So you're talking about the difficulty and of these kinds of jobs. Yes, the difficulty of these kinds of work, the physical difficulty of doing this work, the lack of stable jobs, and the difficulty to be able to have build a family life. The second statistic is when you ask young people from these districts how they define themselves. I'm talking about young people from these working class districts, but also it applies to a lot of people generally, and a lot of French people. When we ask them what defines you the most, they talk about their education and their work that defines them the most, before their family or cultural heritage, and before any other things. So the working class districts, what people want is to be able to find a place in society. So it's a pillar of social cohesion. Yes, absolutely. Our work today is the foundation for the nation, as the gentleman said earlier. This is where people come together. There's a social cohesion. And that's where people can find their place in society. That's why we need to envisage these public policies within the company and to corroborate this. It's really a question of recognition and people to find their place in the society. One person out of every two in these working class districts who are not considered in their true value in French society.
And they're totally denigrated in the media. So it's a question of finding one's place and to feel useful and to be able to contribute. And that's the reason for me, the message I want to pass on is to think of the jobs as a cohesion tool, as a recognition of the contribution of people to society. I still don't understand at this stage why after COVID and all these essential workers, the importance of school, why these jobs are not revalued, whether through wages and through society, through the exposure they have and the consideration they may get for their activity. That's what's the challenge today, full employment and the will to work of people. Draw a bridge, span a bridge with the president of Forvis Mazars France, audit cabinet consultant, as a globalized company. Even though you're at the head of the French subsidiary, you intervene over certain initiatives. I'm thinking of, I think you are a major player, you accompany non-profits, associations, and initiatives like Nos quartiers ont du talent, our districts, our neighborhoods have talent. So Forvis Mazars is a service company. We perform audits, provide consultancy. We have two specificities. The first is that we recruit young people with major university degrees. Our age average is 29 years old, so we don't really represent society, and our people are not really indicative of the debate we're having. But there's a strong correlation between full employment and the value, the meaning we give to work, how we accompany the active population. We talked about public policies which are evolving, sometimes with success, sometimes without, the questioning. I think that with a view to this topic on how we care for the active population, we have a responsibility of having collaborators that are in good health. There is no sustainable full employment if we don't have collaborators that are in good health. What this means is that they feel comfortable, they see meaning in their work, they have faith in their future, in their professional future. And so we do support certain associations. I'll share our experience with you, but not necessarily transposable, but I think it sheds an interesting light for all of us. To have collaborators in good health, I think, well, you have to train them, first of all. We adapt to their demand for flexibility. The younger generations have a lot of expectations, and not the same as those as we were 30 years ago when I started working at Mazars. And third, we give them the possibility to commit themselves. So to train them, you understand what it means. We are, how can I say, we fuel the French society with these future managers, because people don't join us to have a career. or to become associates, in our business. I've been working in this company for 33 years. There's a big turnover, 5,000 people today. We hire 1,500 people, recruit 1,500 people per year in France, and the equivalent and the world over. More than 100 countries we have in our industry, a little more than 20% of turnover, which is slowing down today due to the context. And our promise is employability. We don't try to retain our staff members. What we want is to develop the employability of our collaborators, enable them to take responsibilities, irrigate French society. We are working in two major sectors that involve all our enterprises: data and artificial intelligence on the one hand, and sustainability on the other. And we took the initiative of, we used to say Mazar, but since the 1st of June we say Forbes Mazar. So we created a data school to give our collaborators the skills and competencies that will enable them to be flexible in a world that will evolve with AI. Same thing with sustainability. We took an initiative to develop, it's a word from my colleague, bilingualism, so that our collaborators can speak finance and they speak sustainability, and not only finance, technology, information system, and sustainability. The second topic on how we can adapt and respond to their expectations in terms of flexibility. Since the COVID, we talked a lot about work, but beyond that, I'll take 2 or 3 examples to respond to these demands from this young generation, average age 28, who see the world evolving, who have other envies, other wishes. We took the decision to suppress the exclusivity clause item in our contracts, to seek the proper balance between their commitment with us and their personal envies, give time to other people, or develop a personal project in parallel. No exclusivity clause. Secondly, we allow some people who decide to leave us to join companies like Malt, with which we work, and we find them as freelancers, and we're happy to have them because they participate in our competency hub. So we enable them to commit themselves. We accompany them, we give them our time to help associations, to support associations. You mentioned our Neighborhoods Have Talent, which is a well-known national organization. We have another one that's smaller, which looks like your association, Mrs. Seliki, which started from Chambéry, developing a national project. It is also in Saint-Denis, and also in Britain. Do you think that there are more initiatives today, that companies like yours that are doing well? You're the startup nation in a way. These companies, are they concerned with initiatives, as you mentioned, and there's a will from your staff members to commit themselves? Well, there's a lot of envy, a lot of hopes, a lot of expectations from our collaborators, and a lot of companies. Forbes Mazar is not an exception to the rule. Like yesterday, I sitting around a table, we talked about mixity with young people from the Rencontre Économique Dex. We talked about mixity, the CSR commitment of companies. You say that these companies are doing well. It's true for Manpower, it's true for Malt. They act. They're active. I ask you the question because we see where we are today. It's a very particular moment. And the discussion in these rencontres is to bring worlds together. So do these worlds, are you under the impression that they manage to meet, and that there's not, on the one hand, those who have done studies and the others? Well, I think it's our responsibility and a privilege to help those who have less than we do. Generally speaking, it's true in businesses, and the young generation has a lot of expectations to that effect. We have the chance of being able to do that, And at least at Forbes Mazar, we give time, financial means, but mainly time. We give our time. I think this boils down to having collaborators that are comfortable, that feel good. They're not, in limitless productivity or no. It participates to this logic of striking the right balance and spanning bridges. You wanted to react to that, Ignace? Interesting what's been set up for the youth and generally speaking for the staff members and companies. We all have, I did a business schools. I work in offices sometimes in the field. We're not really aware, I must say, of what work means to the large majority of French people who are not managers, who are not working under the same conditions. I think it's important to be aware of that. And it's the responsibility of all business managers to be interested in that, because in all ecosystems you have the cleaning people, you have the this sector of population that's not always present when you have the end of year parties, not concerned by the care movements and everything. So I think it's important to really look into their working conditions and all that, and this has to start from the top. That it's the senior managers that instill this idea of opening up, developing social policies in businesses, and take into consideration in their human resources policies and in their concerns those employees that do not necessarily correspond to the senior staff. Now, to answer, do companies take into consideration these different levels, layers of populations? Because you're an observer, you see both sides of the medal. You establish a link between both. I think businesses are aware. What we do collectively is not enough. We have to admit. And there have been some very strong commitments. We took part in a number of operations, including in rural areas, following the Yellow Jacket event, try to work on that. And to go back on what was said, it's true that businesses strongly contribute to support a certain number of nonprofit organizations, and nevertheless, we're very far from, and ironically, it's an understatement. It shows that the system is not performing well. It's crazy. Because if we put a lot of energy, sincere energy, and yet being so far from where we would want to be, I think we should ask ourselves some questions. Our challenge ahead of us is a big challenge. And as a citizen and as a head of a company, I'm worried that on Monday everything start back again like before. So how collectively, I think businesses, and particularly those that can have an important impact, they should contribute, supporting all intermediate bodies, public authorities. So what do we do? Do we do a diagnosis? Do we do a pseudo diagnosis, put in place a certain number of actions, maybe, but in the end, not having an impact? So I think we all have to get together to see how we can have a stronger impact and head towards a more inclusive society, and that corresponds to the demand and expectation of our citizens. It's not the case today. So, but time is passing by. Stéphane, maybe you have something to say on that. What I think is very important is the culture of assessment, evaluation, which is not developed enough in France, notably for the assessment of public policies. I think of training. It's not a problem of means, like in education, for example. We discuss about means and everything and targeting, but in terms of vocational training, we spend 35 billion euros per year, as much as the budget of higher education and research, and everybody's complaining on the results, saying that it doesn't reach the people who need it. The programs are not top quality, so we did a reform of vocational training, but we still haven't evaluated or assessed. We feel like helping the businesses towards useful training. So we have to develop the culture of evaluation, of assessing the different programs. There are methods, there are approaches that are good, others that are less efficient. They need to be identified. So time is fine, but I think it's important to give the floor. So please use the microphone and please ask questions and introduce yourselves beforehand. Clearly. Thank you, madam. I'm Florence Lévy. I've worked 25 years in communications. I was the communication manager. Now work at National Education Board for not finding a job in communications, because at the age of 50 you're just terminated and it's hard to find a job. So your question. So of course I signed up on the MALT platform. I wrote some white papers for companies, but actually we create mercenaries as employees. We ask employees to be more, to match the values of businesses in terms of commitment. But what you see is that more and more by default, we sign up on platforms as self-employed people because we're not employable as of the age of 50 and sometimes before. So my question is how we manage to continue to develop the commitment. I did some brand platforms, internal communication to develop this commitment. But if we force employees to do freelancing, and in communications is very frequent because we don't want to hire these people. So what do you answer to this? Prefer freelancing to permanent employment? So don't we ask too much from the candidates? Don't we expect too much? So several things here in what you said. First element around what we call the unbalances between offer and demand, and that's where it's difficult to have sort of like a mean answer on this. Today you have specialists in AI and they have to make a choice between 20 demands every day, and sometimes it's much more difficult and complex. So if we go back on the seniority, I think that we need to support those people who have an expertise, and that it be valorized and valued at the level of their expertise and not at the level of the market and competition. So there's a public element in there, but there's another element that is, unfortunately, careers are no longer linear. And it's only point I wouldn't agree with you, is when you sign up on Malt or another platform, we continue to call on consultants to try to find a job, but we seldom say, I decided to do this and I want to do this to the end of my career. The example of Didier at Mazar is emblematic here, because we think there are some choices to do some missions here and there, to get a full-time job and then go back to something different, you know, flexibility. And to sort of like loop with everything that was said, we have a framework that enables to this difference has to be planned for in the legislation. Today it's totally abnormal that you, madam, have the same rights and duties than the deliver person who is victim of a status. So there's these two profiles correspond to the same duties and the same rights. So you're opening up a new field here to review the social model. I don't think we can have time for that. So, sir, my name is Yanis. I work in the Associated Media. Before addressing my question, I'd like to make a comment. I'd like to congratulate and thank the people here on stage, especially Ines. I think it's too bad in a society that wants to favor mixity and gender representation. There are only two women on this panel. So the position of the woman with the Rixin law, we see that there are more and more women who have responsible jobs, but less and less women today who are at managing levels in companies that they created. What do you do today with young women? How do you encourage young women to develop their projects, create their own businesses, and accompany them right up to the creation of their businesses? Thank you for your question, vast question. I think that just like when you want to encourage the emergence of talents in all social groups, representativity is very important. We need to open that door. And that's one thing that, first question I ask myself is why in this environment would some people not emerge? I think often it's a question of the culture, a question of process, but also social reality. Today, you tell us we need more women in management positions. The figure is there are more women in the poorer sections of the population, especially when they're single-parent household. They do difficult jobs with chopped-up work schedules and things. So we can't work with this aspect of managing women if you don't study their whole curriculum and their work experience. Where I think we will agree is that the business today has a role much more than just a mere economic role. I think it's the foundation of the French nation, is when people exchange between different social layers, that they put a word on these values and how they implement all this. Today, when you're in the business world, I'll conclude here, we know that the most difficult jobs today, it's done by immigrants and women. When you know that, when it's obvious, it must be said. Because today there's the narrative is opposite to that. It's important to know who's working today, who does what is the reality of work today, and why at this top management level not everybody's represented, whether women, minorities, people from immigration, for example. Okay, we understood this well. Word, Monsieur Denis Graoui. On these two questions, well, I think your two questions bring out the reality. Clearly, I think we have to change our view on work. We've opposed those who have a job with those who don't. Women, you talked about seniority, all the retirement reform and everything, retirement plan reform. We know what we have to do for seniors and the equality between men and women. I'm sorry not to be a woman, but you know, not only at top management level, but the part-time. You know, Mrs. Bourne had said that she would commit herself to part-time jobs, but they're imposed at tax that they're taken by women. So we have a problem of articulation between private life and professional life. You talked about you know, how you care for the children. So when you have children to take care of, it's difficult to find a job. And when you have a single parent family, 85% of women are concerned. So thanks to your question, we're touching reality. We see that the world of labor it's women who are responsible for their children, for the care of their children. I think socially, women should, men should take more of their share on this. And these are other topics. So I think that would be a way to fight against inequalities, when men take their share. You know, they changed the law, you know, to take care of newborn babies, a week more for the parents. I'm sorry, we don't have time to take another question. We can continue this debate after, but now I have to thank our guests who prepared this round table, and Thank you very much. Round of applause, thank you. And we'll continue these debates throughout the day at the Rencontre d'Aix-en-Provence, whether online or in your distinguished presence. Thank you.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here for the Rencontre d'Aix for this conference. The subject is Bridging Cultures Across Borders. My name is Laurent Cassin. I work for Boursorama. I'm Director of Information. I'm going to be chairing this session. You can be Director of Information of a science magazine and be very interested in culture. So Françoise Benou is here from the Cercle des Economistes around the table to talk about this subject today. We have Karina Jatinen from the Museum of Finnish Architecture and Design. Hello, Karina. We have quite different profiles, people with different backgrounds. We have Christopher Pratt, who is a skipper and professional navigator. Mathilde Vermeer, author, creator of the Poetic Experience podcast. Hello, Mathilde. We also have Jiakai Yuan, founder and CEO of Shanghai Ethnophilanthropy Fund. Hello, Jiakai. And with us also online, we have Dominique Meyer, President and Artistic Director of Scala de Milan. Hello, Dominique. Hello, everybody. Françoise, I don't know what you think. I think we have the most interesting debate of the whole day. The whole 3 days, you mean? Whole 2 days, yes. Yes, a few words of introduction, perhaps, just to start the discussion. There are many, many things to say, and we have some very interesting speakers from many different backgrounds, and I'm sure it would be impossible to describe everything they do. So we're talking about bridging cultures. Let's say, first of all, straight away that cultures are linked to value systems and hierarchies of values and beliefs, which can be religious beliefs, which are not necessarily designed to be reconciled or be brought together. Rather than bridging, I would say creating a dialogue and creating tolerance. People might have thought globalization, with the favouring circulation of works of art and cultural content, would contribute to bridging the cultures. And in a very relevant book, an economist, Tyler Cohen, has been able to show that globalization nourishes a kind of uniformization and standardization of contents between societies and countries, and that this brings new forms of culture and hybridization of exchanges between societies. That's quite positive. But behind this uniformization, there's not necessarily any bridging. Uniformization is often based on the commercialization of culture and cultural content. For example, 3 major groups dominate the worldwide musical industry: Warner, Universal, and Sony, representing 70% of the worldwide market. And in addition, the increasing tensions in the international scene and the accentuation of competition in terms of soft power also are reducing the possibility for bridging cultures. This can take place within societies also, which can lead to an increase in polarization, and we've seen that very much in France recently and also around the world. So what is the role of culture, the creation of cultural policies? How can they contribute to dialogue and tolerance? There are often recurring oppositions when you talk about cultural policy between the policy of offer, policy of supply, policy of demand, the policy based on territories rather than based on conurbations, support of major institutions rather than small institutions, local approach or national approach vis-à-vis an international worldwide approach, or also private sector versus public sector, and also the suspicion about philanthropic activities. So we could look at all these different oppositions, but it's also possible to overcome them. Let me give you an example. There's a festival in Aix-en-Provence, for example, here. For this festival, you might think, so should it be local? If it's too local, maybe we're going to reduce the quality or reduce the diversity, certainly. So we have to find the right balance between local artists and national artists or international artists. Not always easy, but this might be one of the answers to help bridge cultures. It seems to me that it is It's by overcoming these barriers that we'll be able to encourage this dialogue. And we also have to look at the different regimes play a role in the cultural sphere and can reduce the dialogue between cultures. For example, if we look at Italy, for example, in La Scala, Giorgia Meloni has imposed Italians as the heads of museums and opera houses, and is putting the priority on works that are favoring a new national world of imagination. So these different worlds can exist next to each other, and this can be very original. We have to be able to welcome the broadest audiences possible if we want to be able to encourage pacification of our societies, and this is something that is very necessary today, because our societies are too often polarized and divided. Thank you, Françoise. He has run the Opera House of Paris and the Opera of, and he is now director of Scala of Milan. In fact, Dominique Meyer, bringing together people from different cultures and getting them to work together on every day, that's really your everyday job, isn't it? Yes. It's probably the best part of my job, in fact, because running an opera is like being the Tower of Babel. And I remember when I was working at Vienna, there was a permanent group of singers, which doesn't really happen in France very much. It's more of a Germanic approach, so I had singers who were from Korea, Japan, China, South Africa, South America, who all worked together. It was very interesting. Part of the activity is completely open. For example, when we're holding our auditions, we look at the identity card of the person to see if they're able to interpret a particular role. However, there are political forces at the moment who are trying to compartmentalize. For example, in Italy, there are politicians who would like to have national preference when we choose the different artists. Very often they are people, it's often the agents of these artists who lobby the politicians to put in place this compartmentalization, and often the press plays a role. A few years ago, I was in a jury for a singing competition, and most of the finalists were Koreans. They were from Korea. They were very good. And a journalist asked me, "Are you prepared to give the first prize to a Korean?" I said, "Whoever is the best singer will win the competition, whether they're from Korea or South Africa or wherever." I said to them, so that led me to think a little. I said to them, you need to think a little bit about the reasons why in these countries the map of the world is changing. In these Asian countries, a lot of young people and young women are very interested in our culture than the culture of their own country. That's the question. For a young Korean singer or Chinese singer, Western culture is a very, very remote, distant world. Just imagine that young French people would want to sing in the Chinese opera. I think it'd be incredibly difficult for them. I find it extraordinary that they have such love for Western culture in these countries. Often it's, for example, in South Africa, there is a generation, an extraordinary generation of singers with extremely talented teachers who have fostered this interest in Western culture. I think when you look at the level of cultural production, it's important to open your arms to all of the different countries. There are political manipulations and economic manipulations, which means that sometimes people do create barriers. But in Italy, they have adapted a law to send myself and Stefan Esther to retirement. For the moment, you're still here, Dominique. For a few more months, yes. I'm still here for a few more months, despite this law. One thing that struck me, you talked about opening your arms to international culture. Karina, is that part of your role as a director of a museum and also as a member of the International Conference of Museums? Is that a priority? Above and beyond all of the contingencies we're starting to see, and also for the different cultural activities. For you, is this a fundamental approach to open up to others?
First of all, museums are about culture and cultural change, and cultural connections are one of the main drivers of cultural transformation. And yes, museums are extremely internationally networked, and of course we also have international audiences. I would like to maybe raise one point from the perspective of museums. These intercultural connections should be always looked as historical continuums, and I think that is something that we have to pay attention to. And museums are great places also to learn about these historical developments and how these intercultural connections on the museum field has changed. I think quite essential is to look at the historical changes. And for instance, if we take the collections of the major European museums and their collections, we see how they reflect kind of the oppressive and abusive relationship with non-European cultures in the colonial era. And now if we look at the situation today, we see that the connections are continuing, they are still there, but now along the process of decolonization and reconciliation and in open intercultural dialogue, really, truly. And I think for museums, but also for in societies in general, I think this shift from abusive towards non-abusive relationship is quite essential. And here I think it's not possible without a kind of ability to be a self-critical and have self-reflection. And that again, I think it requires very strong freedom of speech and research and education, as well as respect of international and domestic law. And that's why it's really concerning and worrying also, as Francois also referred to, there is the development in Europe at the moment. We see the polarization and militarization, and we see the erosion of democratic principles in European countries too. And I think that's the thing that also the museums have to fight against. And
bon, on voit déjà effectivement.
Yes. When we were preparing this debate, we saw that things are becoming more and more complicated. And basically, people don't want to choose the nationality of a singer. They don't want to choose a religion of a singer. That doesn't have to matter. Do we want to choose the culture of a sailor when you're in the middle of an ocean? You're a sailor. I'm not a sailor myself. I don't know the technological terms. You're on a little boat in the middle of the ocean. You just want to be able to make sure everybody works together as a team. You're not really worried about nationality. Yes, absolutely. I am reacting to what the president of La Scala said. We don't. We say, I only want to have French people with me on the boat. No, we're not. We're looking at their skills as a mariner, and their human skills, their soft skills. That's absolutely fundamental when you're on a boat together, where you're in for several weeks with 4 or 5 of you. A very small living space of 4 or 5 square meters. This is a bit like being in a space module in outer space. Yeah, it's best if everybody gets on together. So it's extremely important to be able to make sure everything works. And this multicultural aspect is very important to have the best possible performance of our team, to have a common vocabulary and references. And in any team and in any company, this is always the case. It's important to have this cultural diversity, and in any case, this is how we see this in high-level sport and high-level team sport with different nationalities. This is something I've experienced in the latest round the world team competition. There were 4 different nationalities in my team. it's very important to have this multiculturalism in the team, so you have a good management of risk and good management of decisions. When you have people have different culture, different biases, yes, right, I imagine not everybody navigates and sails in the same way, that's right. So the only solution to take the right decision, here we're at the economic meetings, Daniel Kahneman said this, the best thing is to remove the biases from our decisions. And the best way of doing that is to have people around the table who are going to take the decision and have different biases. The power of multiculturalism is exactly there in high-level sport and in any kind of organization. But for it to work, the prerequisite is to have created a reference base and a common vocabulary, have taken the time to work on that in advance to avoid any of these issues that you can have of misunderstandings, not on a fundamental level, but on in terms of the content. So the importance of this common vocabulary cannot be exaggerated. And I think it applies to other types of organization. When you're in the middle of the ocean or in the middle of the Pacific, you're on neutral ground. Perhaps it's the last base where nobody has put a flag yet. It's true that the concept of a border, although we could say it exists less and less, or maybe it's being reintroduced in Europe a little bit now, but at sea, clearly there are no borders. There are waters that are international waters, although sometimes some waters belong to a certain country. This is something you don't feel at all. And as you said, it remains one of the last spaces of freedom where we are completely absolved from this subject of barriers or borders or regulations. Another important aspect that you might want to react to is interesting when we're talking about about maritime law, which is this solidarity of mariners. So if you have a problem, any other vessel has to change their course and come and help you. Yes, they have to. This is maritime law. There is an obligation. It's part of our culture. And this solidarity between mariners. But it's maritime law has this obligation for other vessels to help a vessel that is in difficulty. Then you can talk about different issues of migrants, etc., where it becomes a much more difficult and complex situation, and their maritime law no longer can be, or some people don't want to apply it in the same way. Then it becomes much more complex in political terms. But in any case, I think that on this subject of how we bring cultures together, I think the sea and the events that take place at sea are something that can be transferred, and it still works. Yes, it still works. Okay, Mathilde, maybe we should start from a different point of view. Maybe we've moved a little bit quickly onto this subject. When we discussed this earlier, you were saying, okay, it's fine bridging cultures, but what's going to happen when you bridge cultures? Let's look at what the message is going to be when you're bridging cultures. Yes, absolutely. I was thinking specifically of art, because we have many different types of artists, and some of them want to promote values of brotherhood and universality and solidarity and beauty as well. It's a role of art to connect us with beauty, and other artists don't have those same values. Today, I think it's interesting to find artists who will bring two people together regardless of borders. And there are several interesting facts that have an impact on society. For example, the Me Too movement a few years ago started in Hollywood with major cultural players from the movies, and they made statements in favor, they denounced violence against women, and they launched a huge movement. And so culture still has an impact when it involves the major players. And this can be the same. You see the phenomenon in music and in cinema. Very recently, for example, I'm thinking of the Taylor Swift tour, the Eras tour, an American singer. She's an tremendous economic power as well, and political power as well, because she's an opponent of Trump. She embodies something which seems to wake up amongst people a desire to come together and to celebrate the values of love. This is what she says herself. We have Beyoncé as well, who has recently made pronouncements against racism and in favor of multiculturalism. And these artists bring people together right around the world. And as I want to talk about poetry, I don't know if it's the right time, as we're talking about otherness and values, as this is my passion, is contemporary poetry. Today it's very interesting to see that we have poets and women poets around the world especially who are writing very short texts and are saying very powerful things about our era and about human nature. And so I wanted to read you something. We have André Chedid, who is a poet you may know of. He was born in Cairo. She was born in Cairo. He was Lebanese and is now French. It's part of a long line of artists in France. I want to read you a text where she talks about otherness. I wanted to read it to you. Today at the Rencontre Économique, where we don't talk a lot about poetry, this is the first round table we're going to read out poetry and the Rencontre d'Aix. So run by the scientific director of Boursorama. Yes, it's quite something. And the interpreter would just like to say that poetry is extremely difficult to interpret, so I'll do my best. So this poem is called The Other. My Other. My person who resembles me, in this flesh that makes me up, in this heart that beats, in this blood that cavalcades, in this death that is awaiting us, and in this brotherhood of our brief lives, our brothers, our others, wherever you are, I am. Magnificent. It's worthy of a round of applause, I think. Taylor Swift makes people want you to come together and to know others. You said, Matilda. Isn't this the aim of philanthropy as well? To get people to want to know, to meet and to talk to other people, to smooth out the difficulties that can occur, to get people to want to have a common objective, a cultural objective.
Thank the host for the invitation. It's my first time to be in this city. It's a lovely city. And go back to your question. I think, for me, it's kind of interesting. The multiculturalism has been sort of brought up so many times. But I would say we Chinese, we're not very good at multiculturalism because we have 1.4 billion people. But 92% of the population is Han and ethnicity. So we are learning about connecting cultures. So I'm really here to learn and to explore.
To learn to connect.
Exactly, exactly. As for philanthropy, Ethno, my fund is a startup fund that I founded last November. So basically, we have a group of young entrepreneurs, Chinese young entrepreneurs. They're interested in international cultural exchange because even though, again, globalization has been talked about, yesterday and today, but I'm not sure how many people in the audience know that China only joined WTO 2001. So if you take the 3-year COVID away, so China is really been part of the globalization less than about 20 years. So we're still learning.
It's really recent.
It is very recent. So we are learning, and also a little bit about my kind of a personal story. The first person in my family with a undergraduate degree. The first person in my family with a master's degree. Mm-hmm. I'm also the first person in my family that worked in a multinational company. And in my relatively short career, the 20 years of it, it's North America related. So I think China is really learning to embrace the multipolar culture world, a world that is beyond North America and the US. So again, I'm really here to learn about culture elsewhere and really to explore opportunities for collaboration.
Bon, voilà. Être là pour apprendre, c'est un message magnifique. Et en même temps, dans ce qu'on dit, nos différents participants...
So this is very interesting. So what we see from what our different participants say is that it's becoming more more complicated, often for the wrong reasons. Politics and the economic world start to get involved. As you were saying, Dominique, you have to deal not only with your role as a manager of the opera, you have to be a diplomat and an emissary and a politician to prevent people overlapping and trying to take over your activity. Without being too naive, most of the major opera houses are financed by state money to some extent. We're never separated from politics. For every opera house, it's the same. Is it more complicated now? Sometimes relationships can be very toxic. The trouble is that when politicians want to use culture as a vehicle for their political discourse, for example, or for their ideology. For example, at the moment, there's something quite amusing, which is UNESCO has decreed that Italian singing, bel canto, should be included as one of the worldwide treasures of humanity. So we've been asked to take action in that sense and to promote a bel canto. Yesterday evening we had the Mozart's Requiem. Tonight it'll be Turandot, which is Italian opera. We had a French opera was produced 3 nights ago here. I wouldn't say bel canto is any better than beautiful French or German or Russian singing. It's completely absurd. What I observe that often for reasons to do with propaganda and ideology, people want to use culture for different purposes. I think this is rather naive. I have a lot of respect for UNESCO and also for the treasure of humanity, and whether it's for sausages or for operatic singing. I think it's a bit naive to have this approach, but nevertheless we can see that it's something that has been constructed. There has to be a declaration that is read as part of the television broadcast. So there's a kind of interference by politics in our activities, and this interference seeks to re-compartmentalize culture, which is, by its nature is very open. For example, in Norway, and recently there was a government which imposed use of Norwegian singers only in their opera house. That's absurd, because it just creates regression, and everything goes backwards. It means you have to have people coming from every country who do the best they can, who try to represent and perform the works as best they can. This international scene has always been extremely dynamic and alive in the world of opera and in the world of music in general. A year ago, I heard a speech where a Secretary of State of Culture in Italy explained that for example, there were many foreign singers singing at the Paris Opera. You have to remember the creator of the Paris Opera was Jean-Faustin Anouilh, and he made his family name French. In fact, he wasn't French originally, and his director of opera of the Paris Opera is currently a German, and everybody's very happy with that. I explained this to this politician. I think sometimes there is a political manipulation. I think the cultural world is too strong for the politicians to be able to take it over. I think the market forces often create barriers as well, and can make things more complicated as well. Françoise, you had a question? Yes, I had a question, Dominique, about the circulation of works of art. We've talked a lot about fragmentation throughout these couple of days. Do you think that cooperation, I'm not talking about circulation of individual artists, I'm talking about the circulation of works of art and cooperations that you have with other opera houses. This fragmentation we're observing in the world of economics, is it something that's reflected in the world of culture as well?
No, the cooperation between the European institutions is very strong. It's sometimes limited by politicians, as we saw recently in an exchange between France and Italy on temporary exhibits and the loan of works. But I find that in the field of music, opera, for example, the opera, there are the language barriers sometimes, but in opera, it's everyday life, and I would say simply because it passes through people, and everybody knows everybody. You know, even though it's an environment, it's a place where there are jealousies, and but people like each other. You know, they respect each other. We work on garden. We work with the German opera houses. There is a lot of solidarity and the will to develop common projects in common. It's not always easy for a simple reason, and that is the way we can present works differs, changes. Beauty is not the same, is not perceived in the same way. We have to find a common language so that cooperation becomes possible. But it's always been the case in the last 50 years, and for economic reasons also. If at the Scala we have a new production that we propose 5, 6 or 7 times, well, great if it's shown in Paris or London later. We agreed projects that have been designed and developed by colleagues from other countries. It's our everyday life. I don't see any hindrances or barriers to that effect. There are very interesting things that have been just said. At the same time, we talk about politics, even though Dominique says that it's an everyday topic. But politics, the politicians are more and more involved in culture, and at the same time, there is this economization, I don't know if it's a new word, a new formulation, where culture should be profitable. You know, culture is a luxury that it could be that culture is a luxury we could no longer afford. Culture could be a culture we can't afford. That's a big issue in terms of profitability.
I think you are referring to our Minister of Finances in Finland,
Voilà.
and she really she represents the True Finns, which is the right-wing populist party. And before the elections, she stated that culture is a luxury product that we can't unfortunately afford. We are spending too much money on culture. So I was thinking,
Et on précise que les finances publiques, la fin.
And we must say that the public finances in Finland are in a much better state than here, for example.
now they are really cutting heavily at the moment in kind of austerity politics, and even our Minister of Finances presented herself in social media with huge scissors just to make jokes about these cuts, which was a little bit shaky. I think regarding the funding, of course, for the museums, which are not-for-profit institutions, and still we have the huge responsibility to take care and preserve the cultural heritage of humanity. So we cannot do it only based on for-profit, of course, but still museums are changing very rapidly, and actually it's interesting that we are, for instance, creating a new museum of architecture and design in Finland, and it's a big enterprise between state and the city of Helsinki, and they have both invested 60 million euros, and there are also private investors, and now there is a company, limited liability company, that is running the museum where I work. And even if it's not for profit, it's expected to generate own income, like about 50% of its income. And we know that the public funding is going down all the time. So I think museums, I would like to say one thing, because I think museums are really, really potential and appealing partners to business life. For instance, And the main reason why it is so is that museums enjoy the public trust. For instance, American Alliance of Museums makes this survey regularly, and there, according to those results, museums top the ranking of most trustworthy institutions. They are more trustworthy to people than news, media, politicians, of course, but also like research institutions, books. And I think this is the most valuable assets the museums have, and we know what kind of crises sometimes also occur when museums make kind of wrong partnerships. But on the other hand, to be able to make the impact in the society, and I think museums are really powerful tools because we have the ability to work with communities. We have like hundreds of millions of visits every year globally. So we reach people and we can affect how they are thinking by what we are presenting to them and how we are inviting them to discuss together things. So I think we should work together. Museums have never worked alone and we never have had the resources, but we have to find new ways to collaborate to make the highest and best possible impact to the society.
Ouais, trouver de nouvelles façons de collaborer, on y viendra. Mais...
Find new ways of collaborating. Yes, we'll go back to this. I have a question for Mehdi. Poetry. Should poetry be profitable? Should make money? Yeah, very good question. Yes, okay. To which I would answer with the answer of a poet. By definition, poetry is useless. And since it's useless, it's used for everything. It's multi-purpose. Poetry responds to this demand of human beings for meaning, for connecting, for connection, communion with others, communion with nature, communion with a sense that is over our heads. Even if we have public policies that tell us that art is luxury, we feel like crying, you know, when we hear this. Where's Churchill? Come on, Churchill, get out of your grave. And during the war, he said, if we didn't have art or culture, why would we fight? Why should we fight? Churchill is a Nobel Prize in literature. He's really into art. He used to paint and things. So we desperately need art. And even if public policies no longer invest or subsidize, and even if we hear some voices against culture, the human being will always seek culture and art because human beings need it. It's parents that tell stories to their children, tales, people who sing, people who read books, and some at the peril of their lives, endangering their lives, you know. Culture has always been a power of resistance. That's why so many artists through time and different periods have been jailed. And whatever happens, I feel like having to say something very positive on the fact that beyond adversity, there will always be artists. And in this movement, if we see so many poetry at this time of AI, social media, if people around the planet, in the US, Macnish in the UK, Cécile Coulon, Rim Batal in France, in Morocco, and all those people, other names, propose poetry, it's because we need to say, to express what makes our human experience. That's where we get together. It's the experience of love, the experience of being alive, the experience of parentality, of mourning, of disease, illnesses. That's the human experience. We need art to sublimate all this and be able to find nourishment in there. And so it's art has an incredible value. And that's why politicians, the economy is involved. We saw the interference. Jacques, you said we're here to learn. We're here to open up. In the end, China has joined the WTO not a long time ago. Is it easy to, at a time when we're under the impression that the world is closing up, when we are under the impression that people have no trust at the international level, people are distrustful, aren't you swimming against the flow?
Well, first of all, I mean, before this panel, I checked the number because, I mean, for the past 2 days, I didn't see many Chinese faces I think I saw less than 10 like Chinese here, but I checked the number. The trade between China and France is 79 billion a year, which is a large number. So I do see opportunities for the two countries to do more together. That's number one. And number two is for those that are not familiar with the philanthropy space in China. China is really going through arguably the greatest wealth transition in China's history. Because the first generation entrepreneurs, when they made their money, they're about to retire. So they're in their 70s. So they're passing their money to their children. And interestingly, I would say 95 or 99% of their kids are educated in the West. So unlike their parents, making money probably is the only thing that they're passionate about. Their kids are very much different.
Vous sentez une aspiration à cet échange culturel, à cette ouverture?
There's an aspiration for the change. Do you feel that the people want that change?
Absolutely. I mean, you can tell from the first generation entrepreneur versus the second generation entrepreneur. I mean, their passion is hugely different. So, I mean, I'm really excited about the philanthropy space in China for the next 10, 20 years. And also, I mean, the other area of opportunity is, for instance, one company that we work with. I wouldn't want to mention the name, but it's an internet company, and its daily active user is 100 million people. So I'm just trying to imagine, I mean, if you can have this access to 100 million people on a daily basis and to use that for culture exchange, I think that's really going to be a powerful tool to have. So again, I see great opportunities, and that's why I'm here to learn.
Bon, on n'avait pas envie.
We didn't want. No, we wanted to conclude this roundtable not on this note, a pessimistic note of worries, but rather on trying to find some solution paths. Bring cultures together is probably the best objective, but what can we do to work better, more efficiently for that goal? Dominique, do you have in your toolbox? Do you have solutions so that things can continue to evolve despite this slight pessimism? I don't know, but what I observe is that very often when there are boxing ups, it's because the people don't practice languages. May sound stupid, naive maybe, but people don't know languages. So maybe we should have 2 or 3 languages. I observed, for example, by coming here in Italy, very often there were very few contacts with international institutions because people didn't speak the language. And so very simple. It makes it sound simplistic, but I think it's essential. And I see also that the incidents that we have when you propose a new opera between the director and the singers, the problems often occur the fact that because they don't speak the language, they make believe that they understand each other, but they don't really. And so the gesture or the inflection is concrete. Well, you realize at that point that people misunderstood themselves. The problem is people don't master language. So I think one of the most important thing is to have people travel, circulate, to make them travel abroad, to make them breathe another air, cultural air and environment. There's a generation here at the Scala of young people who learn languages, and I send them everywhere in the world. I have them attend international meetings they didn't have access to before. I have them travel around the world and try to gain experience and to breathe, again, another air. It has a lot of merit because the enemy of culture is arrogance often, and it reduces the arrogance. Sometimes we feel superior because we don't see, we don't hear, we don't listen, we don't hear about the realities of other countries. I believe a lot in that, in limiting arrogance, having people travel, especially for those who will take responsibilities, learning languages and make people travel. Christopher, that's what you said from the beginning. You're the solution in a way. You all bring us on board your ship, your vessels. Yeah, it's exactly what we do with enterprises. We take them on board to work at sea and work on these topics. But in fact, yes, it's wonderful to hear that in the end we agree on solutions and on the opening up. And another, maybe a positive point in my small world of the sailing races, you know, the French racing system has exported around the world. We inherit from Tabarly, from other famous sailors for the solitary races. You know, in maritime laws, there's a permanent watch. So if you break the law if you sail alone as a solitary sailor. But this idea is exported not in ultra-privileged countries. The idea is exported. And I had a Mexican woman who came to sail with me, and she has projects to organize races, solitary races, and we have other countries involved, and that's really motivating to see that this culture of sailing, solitary races, and everything is exportable. And is not only meant for an ultra-privileged Europe. Learning to communicate at a time where digital tools are so powerful. We didn't address this too much, but sharing one's poetry and text is very simple today with the digital tools. Is it simple to say today that the technological tools exist? Yes, there is a new evolution for the circulation of cultural content. I have a podcast myself, and I use this with a lot of interest. Development of podcasts in England, in the US, and in France. More than 35% listen to podcasts with very different contents, and we hear new voices that way. I think it's very important because the challenge with the AI is not only that it raises a lot of questions, but one of the issues of AI is that it speeds up. Things are going faster and faster, and with its acceleration, one of the risks I see as an artist is that it doesn't cut us out from our heads, but it's sort of like it's cutting us away from our hearts. But to bring people together, we need our hearts, we need our sensitivity, we need empathy, and the fact of the web enables to go around some of the barriers and able to contact more people. Well, okay, it's fantastic. Technology coming as a support to culture. Is that a solution, Karina, or any others, you think?
So for the museums, I think for us, the exchanges often has taken place, for instance, in the form of traveling exhibitions, and this has raised more and more questions from the point of sustainability. So it's like the CO2 prints, and for that reason, a lot of content is going more digital. So also the exchanges, the traveling exhibitions, I anticipate are going to be more and more digital in future too. One thing that I was thinking regarding what Dominique was saying, I think also the same limited arrogance can be experienced within our societies, in our backyards, in our schools, in our shops, like on the streets, everywhere, because we actually live in the multicultural societies, but we do not maybe acknowledge the different realities. And I think as museums, that's because we very much are bound still also to work locally in these buildings where we are. So, but as networks, we can like spread effectively our learnings and skills. But I think one powerful tool is to bring people, a different kind of people together, and to really achieve change. And because without real connection, you can't learn. You can't break your bubbles, and we don't actually know that we are living in our bubbles. So we should really help people to collide with them and cross the bubbles from
Voilà,
us.
faire éclater les bulles et puis qu'on puisse tous se mélanger rapidement.
So really get rid of the bubbles. So Jakai, rapidly, what makes you optimistic? Do you have any reasons to be optimistic?
Yes, talking about solution, one thing that we are trying to build is a China-France philanthropy alliance, and we're building that with our French partners here. And two things that we're going to do that are relevant to today's discussion is one is convening. Our goal is really to bring more Chinese business leaders to here. I mean, to participate in this type of discussions, to understand, challenges and opportunities here. And also, we're hoping to bring more people from France to China. So that's convening, that's number one. The second piece is young leader exchange. This is actually the one thing that I noticed from this forum is the amount of young people participating. That's just amazing, because if you go to, say, World Economic Forum, you only see like business CEOs and wearing suits. But here, you have young people coming and sharing their opinion. I think that's great. So I'm really hoping that we can have young French people visiting China and really to build relations with the young people from China.
Françoise, conclusion, on prend les questions d'abord. Allez, on va prendre les questions si la salle en a.
Oh, I'm sorry. We'll take a few questions from the room, from the floor, if there are any questions. My name is Maureen Pelopidas. I will enter political sciences in September. I have a question that I've had in the beginning of the session. You talked about the youth that are faced with a cultural mix, that are faced with using social networks, world culture. They're faced with artists like Taylor Swift, who are incredibly successful worldwide, who propose love and things. How can we today, faced with the rise of extremist movements and of course the RN in France, there is an identity foldback. Youth refuses to share culture, whereas it's the share of population that has the best access to tools to communicate and to open up. How can we face that if it's not youth that today loves the other, wants to open up? Who else can do that? How can we reconcile this polarized youth? I think we need an additional hour, maybe. We can't have an additional hour. So, essential question, who will answer?
Poser cette question.
So thank you for asking this question. I think it's dramatic what we see today. Obviously, there are a question of education. The philosopher Kant said that you educate taste. You educate taste. Taste is something that you can educate, and you have to foster relationships, encounters, how it is something that provides freedom, and not have this poor vision of human beings that are boiled down to consumers, and we think that it's the whole society that needs to rehabilitate the importance of culture, and know that life does not boil down to produce and consume. That's not the only thing. So we have to find a vast meaning to life, and if we reinvest in culture, it will infuse in youth, because these will be values that are accepted and very important for youth. Maybe a word, all the young people are not for the identity refold. We had a lot of conversations with the young people, 90,000 youth, 12,000 responded to our invitations. And what was striking is that they all wanted to be committed. They wanted to give a meaning to their lives through a commitment and forms of a commitment. There are different forms of commitment, but culture held a very pivotal position. And in what we mentioned in terms of solutions, I think we have to bring responses as to the commitment in cultural non-profit organizations, for example, associations, and this is emerging. Maybe 2 words of conclusion, because we're out of time, unfortunately. Difficult to conclude after this wonderful panel, but I've noted a few things. everything was very rich. Languages. We talked about languages, and Christopher talked about a common vocabulary. And I thought the bridging between those two comments was very important. We talked about technology as a tool that could be used for exchanges. We mentioned the Swift economics, Taylor Swift economics. But besides that, there's the economy of creation, which is not always a creation that fits into a planetary merchandising. And with culture, we're working on both legs when the economy is concerned. And we talked about learning, the learning process, thanks to philanthropy. Very important. And one thing that I feel is very important is, you've mentioned Churchill, but we can talk about Keynes, one of our key economists. Keynes was the first president of the Arts Council, which is the equivalent of the Ministry of Culture in the United Kingdom. And it was someone who had been sent by Churchill to purchase Degas paintings, paintings that had been dispersed. That's why when you go to the National Gallery, you see Degas works, and these works are circulating, these paintings. And I think culture brings happiness. The happiness when you see a work, when you listen to poetry, when you visit a museum. I think it's something very strong with museums to provide this to societies that are unfortunately fragmented. Thank you very much. I'd like to say that Françoise Benamou published a book with Nathalie Heinisch, The Market of Art in the Digital World. So it's at the FNAC kiosk. So this afternoon, if you want to purchase this book, it's proposed there at the FNAC booth. Thank you.